Baruch Hashem. Welcome everybody to week 6 of the History and Effects of Anti-Semitism class. I know that y'all didn't believe me, so I brought evidence today. There is such a book, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. Awesome. Look at that. I'll admit to you, I have not read this entire book, but I did want to read some highlights because it is a fascinating story. I just want to give you, before I read some of these highlights from this time period, which is covering basically the 17th and 18th century for the most part. A few years ago, in fact, it was 2012 that we were invited to go to Jamaica. Now, just to give you a little backstory on this, this is how I found out about this book and about the history of Jamaica and how eventually it led to us adopting Hadassah from Jamaica. I mean, which we weren't, neither my wife nor I were necessarily in the market to adopt a child. It just worked out and Hashem wanted it to be so. So anyway, Rebbetzin, years and years ago, before we've been married for 21 years, and so going beyond that time, before I married her, she had gone to Jamaica many times to try to be a light to the Jamaican people. She just felt really drawn to Jamaica. And in fact, she had wanted to live there at one time, and it just didn't work out. Things didn't unfold for her to do that. Well, she knew some friends who had been missionaries there and working in a church environment, but she had befriended them, and they were going to go back to Jamaica basically to say goodbye to all the friends that they knew, because they're very elderly, and they knew they weren't going to go back. So they invited her to go because they knew some of the same people. And as a result, I'm going along too. And I thought, it's neat. I've never been to Jamaica, so here we go. And this is not a Jamaican vacation trip. This is actually going where people don't normally go in Jamaica, right? So, but it just so happened that because I was going, I guess the people had let some of their people know. And so there was a couple of churches that wanted me to come and speak to them about the Torah and the Jewish roots and Hebrewisms and things like that. So I thought, well, this is very peculiar. Why Hashem would be opening up Jamaica, of all places, for me to come and talk to them. And I knew nothing about Jamaica at all. So on the plane, I began, well, even before that, but on the plane, I was doing some research. And it turns out that Jamaica is like the epicenter of Judaism in the Caribbean. There were 4 synagogues in Jamaica. 3 of them have been destroyed through earthquakes and hurricanes over the centuries. And there's one that remains in Kingston. It's beautiful. It still has white sand on the floor, which is a tradition from the Sephardic Jews who were part of the Inquisition. They would put sand on the floor so that they couldn't be heard when they were gathering to pray. So the synagogue there still has white sand all over the floor as a adherence to that custom. The ark is amazing. It's all of mahogany wood. It's just beautiful. In fact, we've went. It's a traditional shul, meaning that they don't believe in Messiah there, but it's more kind of a mixture of Reform and it's kind of an amalgamation of different branches of Jews. There's not very many Jews there, and in fact, when we went there for a service one time, they were very excited because I think I made up the minyan, or part of it. So I got to make aliyah to the bima there and read from the Torah, there at the synagogue. It was amazing. But they have 12 Jewish cemeteries on the island, and many of the graves date back to the 1600s and before. Well, it all goes back, I found out, it goes back to the fact that when Columbus set sail in 1492, he set sail and discovered the Caribbean, and the kingdom of Spain, Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, gave him Jamaica as his own personal island. It's his own personal kingdom. So the book is basically talking about this reality that the Jews who were escaping the Inquisition ended up in Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean, and another hotbed of Jewishness or Jewish living was Havana, Cuba. A lot of Jews live in Chile, which is We had the bris milah just a moment ago, and Pamela is from Chile. And there are many, many, many Jews in Chile and also in Argentina. But they're found in, at least they were, in Havana, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and other parts of the Caribbean. In fact, historians believe today that there are some 400,000 Jamaicans today that are most likely have direct Jewish blood and Jewish heritage and probably don't even know it. It's just like, again, there was a pastor's wife there, and we still communicate with them and help them, try to bring them into the Torah movement. And we were explaining this to them, and we were saying that, you guys may have Jewish blood. It's possible. So we asked the pastor's wife, let me find out what your maiden name is, and we'll start doing some research and see if we can find out if you're Jewish or not. So we said to her, her name happens to be Alma. We said, Alma, what's your maiden name? She's like, oh, my maiden name? My maiden name is Cohen. Like, what? I said, how do you spell that? She's like, oh, Cohen. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't know any idea. I said, Cohen means priest. That's like, it's one of those Jewish names that if you have that name, there's no sense in going to the computer. Okay, you're Jewish, right? So that's kind of thing. So one of the famous pirates of the Caribbean, not so well known amongst the TV and whatever, movies, but there was a famous rabbi who was also a pirate. And his name was Samuel Palache. Samuel Palache was one of the pirates of the Caribbean. So what else do they say? They say here that there was a friar in Seville. This is when the Inquisition started, or actually about 1391. So it was about 100 years before, about a century before the Inquisition. But he was the one who actually started the fever of getting rid of Jews. He says here that Fervent Martinez, a friar in Seville, provided the spark following a frenzied sermon in which he accused Jews of everything from causing the Black Plague to killing Christian children and drinking their blood. We all talked about that in previous classes. He incited the crowd to rise up, destroy this accursed race. Descending on Seville's Jewish quarter, the rabble slaughtered 4,000 men, women, and children. What is known today in Jewish history as the Massacre of 1391 had commenced. And then from there, pogroms spread throughout the city. The mob's abomination, convert or die, resulted in 100,000 dead Jews and 100,000 converts to Judaism. There was approximately 500,000 Jews in Spain, so that basically leaves 300,000 Jews. And the Inquisition ended up with the murder and torture of many hundreds of thousands of Jews, and eventually the banishment of the same. So what does this have to do with the New World? So it just so happens that in 1492, the very year that the Inquisition began, within a matter of a few months, Columbus is setting sail to the New World. And the author of this book is Edward Kitzler, who was also he's a born and raised Jewish man on the island of Jamaica. He writes that Columbus was Jewish. He was from a Sephardic Jewish family, that he was a converso, he was a secret Jew, and he was surrounded by officers from the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, where all of his officers were conversos. They were secret Jews. And they were really, yes, looking for the New World, but they really were looking for a place to hide. They were looking for a place to live in freedom. And in fact, the story is that Columbus went to the king and queen of Spain, and they said, look, we don't want this expedition. They said to him, we're broke. They just had this big war to get the Muslims out of Spain. And so he said, you know what? I'm just going to go to France, and if France doesn't want this, then I'm going to go to England. Because his theory was the world isn't flat, and that I can get to the eastern part of the world. I can get to China and so on in 3,000 miles. He thought the world wasn't flat, it was round, and that the oceans were not very large. So he thought he could just go there. And he said, someone is going to pay for this because they're going to get all the wealth as a result. So he rides off into the sunset to go talk to France, and a secret Jew who was part of the king and queen's court talked to him at the gate, found out he was going to go to France or England, this Jewish person who was a secret Jews Christian knew that in order for us to find a safe haven, we got to find some new land. So he was a trusted advisor, so he went to the king and queen and he said, you should really reconsider, because if France gets this or if England gets this and it turns out Columbus is right and there is a trade route, they're going to become hyper wealthy and you're going to lose everything. And if it's a matter of money, like you're not sure if you can afford it, I will pay for it. So they sent a rider after Columbus and said, come on back to the king's court. So he came back and they said, you know what? We're going to give you the money to do this. Well, Columbus had a stipulation. He said, well, I won't do it unless you give me hereditary right to the land that I discover. Well, it was important to the Jews because if Columbus had rights to the land, that means he would be the king of that land and they would have a safe haven. At first, the king and queen of Spain didn't want to give that to him because who's Columbus? He's just some guy, right? Some scientist. But finally, they relented because they really didn't have a choice. And so that's why when Columbus discovered Jamaica, the king and queen gave him Jamaica because that was part of his contract. As a result, all the Jews flocked to Jamaica because that's where they were safe. So this happened. And of course, when they discovered the New World, they literally discovered a fortune. When they went to Peru, for instance, there was literally a mountain in Peru that was nothing but silver. It's called the Silver Mountain. And they extracted all the silver out of it. They basically vanquished South America, but Spain became at one time extraordinarily wealthy. And then England and France decided, hey, wait a minute, we need in on this new world venture. And so the book brings down that the Jews became a great ally to the French and to the British because they were being persecuted by the Spaniards, and they were willing to help the French and the British gain a foothold in the New World, so they acted like their spies. So in a great turn of historical irony, what the Spaniards tried to do by bettering their kingdom, by getting rid of the Jews, actually led to their demise. And eventually it caused France and England to become better empires than they, because the Jewish people were helping them. And one of the key ways in which they helped the French and the British is they became the financiers, the sponsors, and I guess you could say the altogether helpers of the pirate business. Because the Jews in the New World who were conversos, who were secret Jews, who were pretending to be Christians, they also happened to be the merchants. So what happened is in Havana, when the merchant ship would set sail for Spain, they would send a message to Jamaica, someplace like Jamaica, and say, by the way, this cargo ship carrying so much gold and so much silver and so much other goods has just set sail from Havana. And the Jews in Jamaica would walk down to Captain Morgan, literally Captain Morgan, and actually he wasn't Captain Morgan, he was actually Admiral Morgan because he had a fleet of pirate ships. He was Admiral Morgan. They would go to Port Royal in Jamaica and tell Admiral Morgan, by the way, these cargo ships have just left Havana and they're carrying gold and silver and all this other stuff headed for Spain. And Captain Morgan would say, oh, hi, matey, and get in his ships and go get those ships. And that's how it worked. And they bled Spain literally dry, because all the gold, lead and silver that was leaving the New World ended up in the hands of the pirates, which ended up in the hands of the British and the French, which also ended up in the hands of the Jews. Because guess what? The Jewish people had an agreement with the pirates, who were basically, this was their business, that they got a certain percentage of all the booty that they got off of all these ships. So everybody wins. The Jewish people win. Spain collapses, England and France succeed, the pirates are happy, everybody's happy. This is beautiful. Not to mention the fact that it's historical fact that it was the Jewish people of Jamaica and other areas who started the rum business and started the sugarcane business and started the coffee business. Blue Mountain Coffee comes from Jamaica, started by Jews. The rum business started by Jews. Yeah? You got to love our Jewish people for that. So the Jews moved, so a couple of points. The Jews moved to the New World. It says in Lima, Peru, the Inquisition reported the city This is the Inquisitor's report of Lima, Peru. It says, quote, "The city is thick with Jews. Everything goes through their hands, from the brocade to the sackcloth, diamonds to cumin seed, the most precious pearl and the vilest Guinea black." Okay, so Jewish people were set up as merchants. In Bolivia, it says it had a silver mine there, and the Inquisitors reported the silver trade is almost exclusively in the hands of crypto Jews. In Port Royal, Jamaica, which is the capital of the pirates world, English merchants protested, "Descendants of the crucifiers of the blessed Jesus, eat us and our children out of all trade." They purchased the entire cargo of a trading ship, divided amongst the paid shares, and distributed the goods through agents in each of the colonies. It goes on to say here that piracy was another lucrative area of commerce in which the Jewish merchants specialized. So how many of you heard of the famous pirate Barbarossa, right? Pirates of the Caribbean kind of play off the Barbarossa theme. He was the antagonist to Jack Sparrow, right? Barbarossa. Well, historical reality, Barbarossa had his first mate, his executive officer, was a man named Sinan. And Sinan, according to England's Henry VII's correspondence and historical record, Sinan was, quote, "the great Jewish pirate." And he had two brothers, Samuel and Joseph Palache, who was also a rabbi, and they commanded their own pirate ships, and they were basically pirates from the Amsterdam Jewish community. So that's pretty neat, isn't it? A rabbi pirate. That's fantastic. I just love that, you know. So what happened here with Jamaica, which is very, very interesting, is that, again, the Jewish people were interested in seeing the demise of Spain and getting their gold back, essentially. Because once they found out that these conversos were actually Jews, in some of these areas they would go and they would confiscate all their property, they would kill some of them, expel them from places like Peru and so on. And Brazil had a lot of Jews. I know we have a Brazilian here in the crowd. So Brazil had a lot of Jews, and they would confiscate their property and kick them out. Well, the Jewish people said, we got a remedy for this. So what they did is they conspired with England to conquer Jamaica. They sent a private message to England and said, listen, you can pretty much take Jamaica with not a very big force, and we'll help you take it away from the Spanish. So the English sent, I believe it was 12 ships to Jamaica, and they conquered Jamaica. And so now England has Jamaica. They have a foothold in the New World. Before, the New World was almost all Spain, but now France and England are and Amsterdam starting to get holds. So the Jews come up with a plan. They said, in order to protect Jamaica from future invasion, because England can't keep a fleet here, they can't keep an army here, they've got other things going on. Here's what we'll do. They suggested this to the English. Let's invite all the pirates of the Caribbean to live here. Because if all the pirates live in Jamaica, then people will think twice about attacking Jamaica. And so they did. So that's how Port Royal became the capital of the pirates of the Caribbean. This is not a joke. This is literal history. Now, unfortunately, Port Royal became the wickedest city on the planet, but stands to reason because you've got all these pirates that are living there, and so it's not a very nice place. And many of them are Jews, unfortunately, but they had lost. They had lost so much, they decided we're going to make this our home. And so Captain Morgan was an actual figure. He was Admiral Morgan, as I said earlier, and he had a fleet of pirate ships, and he was based out of Port Royal. And he worked with the Jews who kept him fed with intelligence. And he launched 6 raids on Spanish ports, the last of which culminated with the burning of Panama City. And it literally brought Spain to its knees. Spain could not, they were being robbed, they were being pillaged, their settlements were being burned. Captain Morgan and other pirates, Barbarossa and others, were just pillaging their ships. This even affected America a little bit later. The Jewish people were involved with the pirates of Tripoli. They were called the Barbary pirates. And so the Jews were financing them as well. Well, in the Marine Corps hymn, Ura, there is this, the part of the song is, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Well, it has to do with the fact that when the United States was a young nation, they were trying to do trade in the Mediterranean, and their ships were getting assaulted by the Barbary pirates who were based out of Tripoli, who were partially financed by the Jewish people of that area. So the United States said enough of that, and they sent the United States Marine Corps to Tripoli, and they basically took care of business with the Barbary pirates and ended that problem. And today, that's why if you ever look at the Marine Corps officer, if you look at a picture of the Marine Corps officer, you'll notice that they have a unique looking saber that they carry. And the Marine enlisted man has a different kind of saber. Well, that saber that the officer carries, which is like a pearl handle grip, gold kind of T-shaped guard on it, that is what's called the Malmuk saber. And it was given to the Marine officer who took care of the Barbary pirates in Tripoli. It was given to them by the Mamluks. And so to this day, Marine officers carry a replica of that saber on formal duty, going back to the time in which they defeated the Barbary pirates. It's all connected with Jews and Judaism. But again, the Barbary pirates is all about taking care of Spain. So really, if you think about it, it's a bit of historical irony that Spain was this incredible empire, and they were brought to their knees really by Jews who they'd kicked out. Think about that. If Spain had never messed with the Jewish people and just left them in place, they would have been the great world power. They would have been like the British eventually became, where it says the sun never set on the British Empire. But instead, because of their hatred of Jews, they became a nation of nothingness. If you think about that, think about every other nation that has hated the Jewish people, to include Rome. Where's Rome today? It's a city. Whereas it used to have the entire world practically. And now they have nothing. Every other nation, this is why when you go to Israel, there's T-shirts that they mention all the different world powers that hated Israel, and it's got their names are crossed out. You know, and I think it ends up with the PLO or Hamas or somebody that says they're next, you know. But basically every other world power has ended up that way. So Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, get it on Amazon. It's a fascinating book. It's interesting to look to see the actual history. This man spent 40 years. He started out, he's a Jewish man, he was a member of the synagogue in Jamaica. He started out just wanting to do a history on the Buccaneers and found all this stuff about Jews who were involved in that trade, and that's what led to that book, Baruch Hashem. Any questions on that? All right. Pirateering, there you go. It's a Jewish way of life. So anti-Semitism, we're now on week 6. This is 1880s to 1905. So now we're starting to just breach the 20th century. This deals with anti-Semitism in France and Russia. So this is where there starts to really develop the idea of the evil race. So Judaism transcends at this point in the minds of the anti-Semite, not just a religious problem of people who are religious in nature and therefore we hate their religion, they're Christ killers and so on. But now they become an evil race. Oh, by the way, let's pause right there. I meant to say something earlier. How many of you have seen, it's ridiculous, I know, so I'm going to get some giggles when I mention it because it's so absolutely ridiculously absurd. But how many of you have seen the latest Hebrew roots stuff on the internet where people are saying the earth is actually flat? How many of you seen that? Okay, all right. Yeah, you wonder how people breathe that believe this kind of stuff. But it's true. They're serious about it. They're serious about it. Okay? And you're awed. You're awed by it. I mean, the sheer idiocy. It's hard to even articulate. But people are serious, and there's these teachings out there. So I got to thinking about this when I was thinking about Columbus, who was part of his deal was to prove that the earth wasn't flat, it was round. So think about it this way. You have a movement of people in the Hebrew roots movement, which unfortunately, a large spirit behind that movement, ironically, is anti-Semitic. It's really strange, but it's true. So then you come around and you say the earth is flat, it's not really round, this is a conspiracy. But then historically you figure out the people who proved that the earth was actually round and not flat were Jews. So you can see where there's an anti-Semitic spirit in the earth is flat theory, because it was Jews who proved it was round. And so therefore, if the earth is really flat, which I hope y'all know it's not, the earth is really flat, and the conspiracy is that people want you to believe it's round. Of course, my first question is, well, what's their point? Like, what's the point of that? You know, they want you to believe it's round, but they made you believe, or it's actually square, but they want you to believe it's round. And of course, my question is, and to what purpose did they want me to believe that? Like, what does that accomplish, right? Not to mention the fact that if you just fly on an airplane, you know that it's round, right? So anyway, but if you think about it, at least I thought about it this way, my theory is that there must be a spirit of anti-Semitism attached to that, because it was Jewish people who figured out it's round, not flat. It was the Goyim who thought it was flat. And isn't it strange that you have a bunch of Goyim who are now trying to take us back in time to the flatness? It's just very strange. So an evil race. The reason it made me think about that when I was thinking about evil race is I was dialoguing this week with another lady who is Christian. And she was saying, look, once you're a Jew, and you're a Gentile, and never can that change. Right? Which is a common Messianic or sometimes Hebrew roots idea. And this is propagated, unfortunately, by the Messianic community. Like, Jews are Jews and Gentiles are Gentiles, and you can't ever become one or the other. And that's, first of all, it's a total lie. The reason that a lot of Messianic leaders, and I say Messianic because Jews don't teach that. It's important to know. That is not a teaching from Judaism. Judaism, and they're wrong on this part, because not all believe this, but some would say, well, if you're a Gentile, you're okay, you can be a Noahide. Although the Torah doesn't really agree with that, but they think it does. It's okay, that's a different argument. But never would a Jewish person say, God forbid, hey Eddie, you want to become a Jew? Yeah, I'm sorry, man, there's no path for you. Like, you're always going to be a Gentile. There's nothing you do to change that. Obviously, Judaism does not teach that. Judaism teaches, hey man, if you really want to become a Jew and like that's really your heart, there is a path for you to do that. Now they might try to deter you from that path for whatever reason, the theological reason, but the fact of the matter is the path exists, and we talked about in the Drosh today, all Jews are converts. So the idea that you can't convert is ridiculous in Judaism, but Messianic Judaism teaches that, and the question is why? Because there's nothing Jewish about that. There's nothing Jewish about the Messianic position that Jews are Jews and Gentiles are Gentiles. Why then does Messianic Judaism teach that? Because it's Christian. And that's where the root of it is. And it messes up the theology. But I don't want to get into all that. I'll get on my soapbox about that. Y'all have heard my soapbox enough. You don't need any more soap. Go. But it does create this idea of racism in the sense that Judaism is now a race, and Gentile is a race. Friends, I want to tell you something, that there's nothing can be further the truth. There are literally Jews of every color. I happen to be, some people say I'm white, I think I'm olive. But look, my daughter, Hadassah, whom we're adopting from Jamaica, and may it be soon that she's here, my wife informed me last night, and I don't know, I guess I was ignorant to this conversation, but she informed me last night because I was talking to Lewis and his wife over for Erev Shabbat. We were talking about the Jews of Jamaica, and I made the comment, I said, and it could be that Hadassah is Jewish. And my wife interrupted me and she said, honey, her birth mother already told us that they've traced their lineage to the Jews of Jamaica. And I said, really? How did I miss that? And she said, no, that's true. And she's going over their names and their history and everything. And I said, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, look, Hadassah is dark-skinned. And she's got a beautiful, really cool Jamaican brogue. In fact, she sounds like a pirate. I have a recording of her. I said, Hadassah, say prepare to be boarded in my phone. She's like, what, Dad? I said, say prepare to be boarded. So I push record and she's like, prepare to be boarded. And I said, that's fantastic. Just love it. So sometimes I'll just press play on my phone, prepare to be boarded. I'm like, oh, this is great. She's precious. But anyway, Judaism has never been a white religion. It's never been a brown religion. It's never been a black. Listen, Moses' wife, Zipporah, was black. Okay, and some think that may have been Miriam's problem with her. There may have been a race. We don't really know, but it could have been a race issue she had with her. The point is look, there are Chinese Jews today in Western China. They found their community. They've got this Jewish cemetery with the menorah and everything. And Israel is bringing them to Israel to make aliyah. And they found their lineage. They trace their lineage to Manasseh. So the concept that Judaism is a race, like once you're a Jew, you're always a Jew. Once you're a Gentile, it's foolishness. It's never been that way. But I told this lady online, I said, listen, okay, I understand this. I've heard this many times. Let me just ask you one question. If what you believe is true, how can you explain Abraham? Because if a Jew is a Jew always and a Gentile is a Gentile always, the entire Jewish nation began with Abraham. How could he cross over if you can't cross over? And of course, it was cricket. She never answered that because it totally destroys the argument. Abraham is the first Jew according to Judaism. He converted and became a Jew, and that's how Judaism got started initially. But if you can't make the crossover, well, there's another example. What about Ruth? If you're always a Gentile, what about Ruth? And Ruth is the mother of Messiah. In fact, this was an argument of the heretics. I think I might have mentioned this in a previous class, perhaps, but did I? Y'all look at me like I didn't. Okay. That's good that I didn't. Now I get to say it. So when King David was born, there were some, and when I say heretics, they were heretics, but really in their time, they were halakhic masters. They were the leaders of the Sanhedrin. The man who was the prince of the Sanhedrin at that time was a man named Doeg, D-O-E-G, Doeg. And he was the prince of the Sanhedrin when Saul was king. And he taught, based on the Torah, that David's not even a Jew, much less worthy of the kingship, because his mother ultimately is a Moabitess. And the Torah says that a Moabite cannot enter the community. Well, Samuel and his colleagues were arguing, no, the halakha is that a Moabite cannot enter the community, but a Moabitess can. In other words, if you're a male Moabite, you're out. If you're a female Moabite, you can enter in. And it has to do with the fact that the reason the Moabites couldn't enter the community is because they didn't bring bread and water to Israel when they were in the wilderness. But the rabbis bring down that it's the man's responsibility to bring the bread and water. A woman can't just take bread and water because that wouldn't be zanut. It wouldn't be modest. It's a man's responsibility. Because the men refused to do it, the women were absolved because it's not right for them to go out. The men weren't. So now a female Moabitess can enter the community. A male Moabitess cannot. So that's what they were arguing. But Doeg was saying, no, they can't. Well, if Doeg was right, which he wasn't, thank God, but if he was right and he was taking a strict view of the Torah, guess what that means? That means that King David, God forbid, is not a Jew, which would mean that Messiah is not a Jew and not the Messiah. Well, if Ruth can't convert, if a Gentile is always a Gentile, Ruth couldn't convert, guess what that would mean? This person who's a Messianic Jew, her hope, God forbid, is worthless. Because the Messiah that she believes in, if that is her view, she's just disqualified him from being the Messiah. You see how that works? It's really satanic, actually, if you think about it, this whole concept. At its root, I submit, is anti-Semitism. Because why doesn't this woman, think about this. We talked about this, I think, in our first class. This woman follows the God of Israel. She believes in the Messiah of Israel. She, as a Messianic Jew, believes that there's some level of validity to the Torah of Israel. But she doesn't want to be Israel. Think about that. What if I made Aliyah to Jamaica? But I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to live in Jamaica and be a part of Jamaica, but I didn't want anything to do with Jamaican culture. I didn't want to have, have the Jamaican hair. I didn't want to eat, the chicken. I wanted nothing to do with Jamaica. And if somebody said, "Are you Jamaican? Because I understand you live in Kingston, and you live in Kingston," I'll say, "No, I don't want to be Jamaican." That would be racist, right? Wouldn't it be? They said, "Why don't you want to be?" I don't want to be Jamaican, but I want to live in Jamaica. I want to enjoy the benefits of Jamaica, but I don't want to be Jamaican. Why not? What would be in my heart to prevent me from doing that if I'm living in the community and trying to be part of the community? It's ridiculous if you think about it. So where does it stem from? Well, I think in this case it's anti-Semitism. So the evil race. So the dominating belief was that the Jews were an evil race bent on dominating the world. It's remarkable that people still believe this, and yet if Jewish people are bent on dominating the world, then why does the world still hate us? We're doing a really bad job. Like, we're really, really bad at the conspiracy thing because we keep getting blown up. Oppression became justified as many believed that, left to their own devices, they would subjugate the nations. So the idea is we got to control the Jews, otherwise we're all going to become subjugated by them. In France in the 1800s, the Jews numbered only 75,000 out of a population of 39 million. There's 39 million French and there's 35,000 Jews, but now the French feel threatened by us. This is where my family comes from, actually. 1886, French writer Edouard Drummond wrote La France Juive, Jewish France. It was a 2-volume work of anti-Semitism, rumor and myth, to prove that Jews were different beings. That's critical, because what's happening now in the 1800s is that Jews are becoming dehumanized. We're different beings. I think it was Jennifer was telling me this story about her mother-in-law. Well, you say she went to a restaurant and somebody said, "Can I see your horns?" Is that right? Yeah. She went to a restaurant with a coworker, and it was the waitress, right? Oh, the coworker. The coworker, discovered she's Jewish and asked to see her horns, because the coworker was saying that she was taught that Jews had horns and they shaved them down. In Paris, Texas, which I'm sad to say. That's 1940. It's a long time ago, Texas. That's like Oklahoma now, but not Texas. So yeah, but seriously, they thought in Paris, Texas, that Jews had horns on their head. Where does this come from? This comes from the dehumanization of Jewish people. This is why the Holocaust, to a large degree, was successful, and why people could have lampshades out of the skin of Jews, because Jews were not. Y'all know about that, right? It's true. It's true. A lot of Nazis. It was considered a high-end fashion statement to have a lampshade out of the skin of Jews in Nazi Germany. It's disgusting. The teeth, you mentioned the teeth. This is all because of the dehumanization of Jewish people. I will tell you that nothing's been like that in history. We talked about in previous classes about how every race, every skin tone, every race has experienced prejudice. At the time of the Civil War, ironically, the lowest class was not the slave class. The lowest class was Irish. If you were Irish, you were lower than the slave class. So every race has experienced that, but no race has experienced dehumanization. And that's hard for us in our Western minds and our modern minds to think about, because we think about slavery as being deplorable, and it is. But even in the minds of people that owned slaves, humans that were slaves, whether they were white, black, brown, or purple, or whatever color they were never not human. That's the key difference. Whereas in the realm of Judaism, Jews were dehumanized, and that's the point here. So it says here that the first print sold 100,000 copies, making it a bestseller. It says here that it reprinted 200 times over 25 years. We're talking about volumes of work that are anti-Semitic. We think, who would read this stuff? There was an alarming thing. How many of you knew a couple of years ago that the ban on Mein Kampf had been lifted in Germany? Mein Kampf, Hitler's work, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, the book that Hitler wrote in prison, Mein Kampf, was an anti-Semitic work. It had been banned for 70 years in Nazi Germany. But for some reason, there was a lifting of that ban. I guess maybe it expired, its ban or something. So now they're reprinting it and selling it in Germany. Around the same time that it became re-released, somebody in Germany tried to institute a ban on circumcision, which would make what we did here today illegal. Now, fortunately, that was cast down. But, Europe is an interesting place right now. My wife and I think it was a couple of years ago now, or a year ago or something, we just needed to get away. We just needed to just go relax. So we didn't, our big vacation was we went to Houston. And we were going to go to Galveston. We were going to go to the Space Center and stuff like that. So we went to Houston. We got a nice hotel downtown. And it turned out it was great because the Jewish community was right there. So it was a kosher restaurant. It was perfect. Which I recommend that if you go to Houston, stay downtown because the Jewish quarter is right there. And you can go get kosher restaurants and kosher market and everything. So it's perfect. So then I said, let's go to the Natural Science Museum or whatever. So just something to do. It'd be fun. So we went there. Well, we started there anyway. And all of a sudden, we passed by the Holocaust Memorial, or Holocaust Museum, rather. And I said, you know what? Let's go there. So instead of going to the other museum, we went there. And it's very large. It's much larger than one in Dallas. And it was just really amazing to go through that. That night, we went back to the hotel, and that was a night where on the news, they were gathering outside the synagogues in France saying death to the Jews. They were having riots in France outside the synagogue. And it was surreal because we had just spent all day at the Holocaust Museum watching those old reels of Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe. And then go home and turn on the nightly news. And it was like, whoa, like this is happening right now. We're seeing a repeat of history. Which is why, by the way, history is so important. A lot of young people don't like history. They like math and science and different things. People snooze in history class, and it's really a shame. History should be your most important subject. Because if you don't understand history, then you won't understand what we're going through. It's important to understand. A lot of the political issues that are going on today, the political discussion of big government versus little government, states' rights versus national sovereignty, these are not new. This is what the Civil War was fought over. And I was made a joke this morning about who we won our independence from. Most young people don't know that we won it from the British. I was joking, said Japanese, and I said France or whatever. It's a joke. Most people couldn't tell you. That's sad. This is how they get sucked into believing silly stuff. This is why this class is so important. It's a history class, but it also helps us understand how to, again, as I've said many times, how to deal with it in our own heart and avoid it in the future. We don't want to dehumanize people. So he was proving that there was a different Jewish race, and they were not human. Dermont was openly opposed to the Jewish race. He published a popular newspaper, La Parole Libre, the Free World. In it, he continually warned that France was in the hands of corrupt and evil Jews, many of whom were serving in the military. French Jews, in actuality, it says here, were fiercely loyal to the country. which is true. That's most of the case. Jewish people tend to be loyal. In 1894, there was a man named Captain Alfred Dreyfus. He was a Jewish officer. He was on the general staff, and he was falsely accused of spying and giving military secrets to Germany. His court case was corrupt, and it included many secret witnesses and an undisclosed number of documents of evidence. Now, Dreyfus was found guilty, and one French reporter said, "I need no one to tell me why Dreyfus committed treason. That Dreyfus was capable of treason. I conclude this from the fact that he is of the Jewish race." So now Jews began, just because of the very race, began to be seen as, just because of their race, they're like a corrupt animal. Now, Dreyfus was publicly humiliated, stripped of all of his military rank, it says, honor, insignias, and sentenced to life in prison on Devil's Island off the coast of South America. 1896, Colonel George Picquart discovers that the Germans are still receiving spy correspondence, and he opens an investigation suggesting Dreyfus might be innocent. Now, the reason this is because the Germans were receiving spy correspondence, and the French people naturally said, oh, listen, there's a Jew on the general staff. He's obviously giving them our secrets just because he's Jewish. So they have this kangaroo court trial. They sentence him to life in prison, but here's the problem. The Germans are still getting their correspondence. So naturally, they set the Jewish man free, right? No. So in 1898, Émile Zola, a famous French novelist, writes to the president of France accusing the government of conspiracy against Dreyfus. As a result, anti-Jewish riots ensue in 70 cities. In August of 1899, Dreyfus is retired and reconvicted. And reconvicted. He is subsequently pardoned. Hubert Henry, the intelligent officer who headed the investigation, is later discovered to have given false testimony. Now, he goes ahead and commits suicide instead of being arrested. And an uproar ensues as the Jews are accused of murdering him. We can't win in France. So now we're accused of murdering the guy who committed suicide. Walson Esterhazy, the man Colonel Picquart knew was the real spy, fled to England and confessed. So all this time, this man Dreyfus is being persecuted, and the real spy gets away. 1906, Dreyfus is declared innocent. He is reinstated into the army and serves in World War II against the Germans. Now that's remarkable. Basically, 20 years later, roughly, or 10 years later, whatever, he gets instituted in the army, and it ends up going to war with Germany in the World War, and fights against Germany for France. That's the loyalty of the Jew in France, but it didn't help him. So what happens in Russia? Just to cover some highlights from Russia. Russia was loyal to the Eastern Orthodox Church, that is the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantine Church. Now, I will just tell you, I had a friend one time. It's remarkable that we were friends. But anyway, his name was Nasser Kamel. Nasser Kamel. He was from Egypt, which is kind of funny given his name. And he was an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And Nasser invited my wife and over for dinner one night. We were going to go over there and have traditional Egyptian food. This is way back, many, many years ago. And I didn't know anything about the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so we went over to Nasser's house. And I'm telling you that the Eastern Orthodox Catholics, they're not really Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Church. We would think that them to be Catholics, there's similarities, but technically they don't consider themselves Catholics. Catholics is Roman Catholic, and then there's Eastern Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox make the Catholics look like they're just non-observant pagans. I mean, it's like a Camel cigarette without the filter. I mean, these guys are hardcore to the max, and this is what existed in Russia. So in 1825, the Russian Tsar Nicholas I begins a campaign to assimilate Jews via military draft at age 18. Required service, 25 years. He figures, hey, look, the best way to get Jews to not be Jews anymore is to become Russians and get them in the service. So if you're Jewish and you're 18, you're required to serve in the army for 25 years. It says here, the chief benefit to be derived from the drafting of Jews is the certainty that it will move them effectively to change their religion. That's the whole point. 12-year-old boys, so 18 turned out that wasn't effective enough. So now they got 12-year-old boys, and they were taken for special training until their 18th birthday and then sent to the army. Can you imagine that? You're a Jewish person living in Russia. You've got a 12-year-old son. Then they would come take your son at 12, put him in special training, military school, and then when he turned 18, he had to serve 25 years in the army. Every Jewish community had a quota for 12-year-old boys. If they did not have enough, then the boys 8 to 10 were drafted. Every Jewish community had to supply so many 12-year-old boys. We don't have that many 12-year-olds. That's no problem. We'll take them as young as 8. Once in camp, they were pressured to convert. Judaism was absolutely forbidden. They were harassed, beaten, and even jailed. And it turns out that 2/3 of them went ahead and converted. State schools were open for the boys, 8, to teach them Russian culture. So if you were under 8 years old, you didn't get drafted to the army. You got to go to Russian school and learn Russian culture. March 1st, 1881, Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. Guess who's blamed? The Jews. And so pogroms erupt. So this is a description of the pogrom of Kiev. It says here, one should have seen the fury with which the riffraff fell upon the Torah scrolls. These are Torah scrolls. Torah scrolls. It says the scrolls were torn to shreds, trampled in the dirt, and destroyed with incredible passion. Now we're talking about the Word of God here. These are Christians doing this. This is the insanity of it all. The pogroms were extraordinarily violent events that involved brutal murder, vicious rapes, cruel torment, and unspeakable horror. One should keep in mind that Jews were the target of horrific and sadistic murder because they were Jews. So, there's other notes that I have here that I'm just not going to share. But you should know that sometimes in history, like you see in the movies and so on, you see the pogroms of Russia. You heard about them, and they're breaking glass, they're breaking furniture. The movie that I think is a great movie called Fiddler on the Roof. How many of you have seen Fiddler on the Roof? Yeah. It's a great movie. You haven't seen it in a while. You've been walking this walk for, you should go back and see it because everything will make sense. But even that movie shows some pogroms and so on. But I don't think what people realize is the sheer brutality of the pogrom. And I don't want to go into detail. I've read enough. I don't want to talk about it in detail. But the human suffering and the torment and the murder of Jews goes beyond anything that we could even hear about ISIS. Some of the stuff we hear about ISIS kind of touches on that, but not really. This is one I mean, I respect the Christian community. You know, at one point in my life, I was a part of it. But when I hear about Christians and they talk about Christian persecution, I want to kind of laugh out loud. Because you're talking about Christians were persecuted by the Romans for like that much part of time. And Jews, it really pales in comparison. To the suffering that existed. And the Holocaust is just one aspect of it. The Holocaust is like the crescendo of it all. But all this other stuff has happened. I mean, you have in France, the theory in my family is that we must have converted by force to Christianity back maybe in the 1500s. because that's when my lineage kind of stops. So the theory is there. Well, why would we do that in France? We're 100% French blood. That's been proven. So why would we do that? Well, there was a thing in France where if they would take your children to the town square, tie them to a pole, and if you were Jewish, they would say, convert, or I'm going to burn your child alive. Some Jewish families said, we can't convert, and they would literally watch their children being burned to death. Literally. And so some families, and we suppose perhaps our family, decided that they couldn't bear to watch their children be set on fire. And so they became Christians. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Now, this class is partly, as I've said many times, it's partly about history, but it's also partly about the reality that the people that took the torch and put it to the hay that was setting the children on fire, those people were Christians. And now I've had Christians say, well, they weren't real Christians. No. They were real Christians. They were legitimate, certified, stamped, and approved Christians. Now today you could say, well, the Baptist pastor wouldn't do that. And maybe you're right. But back then, they were legitimate Christians. They weren't pagans pretending to be Christians. They were legit Christians. And the Baptist pastor who lives, or not just Baptist, please don't misunderstand. I don't have nothing against Baptists. I really don't. I mention them a lot because they're just so popular. But the Methodist or the Episcopalian or the Pentecostal, all those guys go to them for their ultimate source of history. In fact, it's not uncommon. I know 2 pastors today that whenever they take their sabbatical, they take a sabbatical once a year, which I don't, and perhaps I should. They take a sabbatical once a year, and both of them go to a Catholic monastery to take their sabbatical. And they have no problems doing that. Why? Well, they're not Catholic. They don't believe in the Catholic Church, but they understand that their root is there. That's the history of their faith. So like it or not, the Baptist, the Episcopalian, or the Pentecostal, they would say, I would never set fire to a young child. I know that. I get that. We're in a Western world now. But you have to understand that your historical root did. And that's why today in the church world, and people come here very often from the church world, and thank God, when I talk to them about being a Jew, something wells up inside them and they go, I don't want to do that. Ugh. Well, they would never set a Jewish child on fire, but you understand that's part of their heritage. It's part of their heritage. And so we have to deal with that heritage, and we have to say no to that heritage. We have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, why don't I want to be a Jewish person? I understand I didn't grow up Jewish, and it's kind of difficult when you didn't grow up Jewish. There's a lot to learn. And I didn't grow up Jewish. I grew up in a secular home. I'm about the Shuvah, so there was a lot to learn, a lot to adjust for us, and whatever, same thing. It's really not any different. And I myself had to deal with anti-Semitism. I myself had to deal with it. I had to deal with that identity. So this class is not a condemnation. It's really it's an expression of my own walk. My family were Cajuns. When I grew up, when I met my wife, a lot of what I ate, oddly enough, was my identity. I talk about kosher eating a lot because, frankly, food affects us, right? We do it 3 times a day, sometimes more. So it affects us. It's not trivial. Some people think it's trivial. It's not trivial at all. Well, what we eat is our identity. And I know that because as a Cajun, I was particularly proud about my heritage as a Cajun. And about all the boudin and the jambalaya and all stuff. When my family made food like that, they made it from scratch. Like we went down to the bayou and got the nasty fish and made it. And I was experienced that as a kid. I experienced that. And so when I was first introduced to, I need to come back to Judaism, I need to come back to the way of my God, I struggled some with that lifestyle because of the identity. So you have to cut that identity and say, well, I got to make a choice. I got to make a choice. What's interesting about Hashem is that once you make that choice and you say, all right, I'm done. And God says, okay, I'm so glad you said that. Now, let me introduce you to kosher Cajun cooking. And today, it's just like for Shabbat, not Shabbat, actually Shabbat we had chicken, but the Shabbat before that, I made for the family, I made blackened salmon with rice and all the Alexander sauce to go on it. It was all kosher. You couldn't tell the difference between that and something else I ate. I haven't made it in a while, but before I've made kosher Cajun gumbo with the French roux and all that kind of stuff. Can't tell the difference. But it's almost like Hashem withheld that until I was ready to say, I don't care, I'm done. I'll eat salad for the rest of my life. And God says, okay, great. Here's how you make kosher cooking Cajun. But he wouldn't allow me to see that. This is my personal testimony. He wouldn't allow me to see that until I was really ready to say, no, I won't let my stomach be my God. But I used to make fun of, I used to have Jewish friends that sadly, I'm not proud to say, I used to make fun of their kosher eating. And I say, where does that come from? Well, I humbly submit to you that I was baptized initially in the Christian church. I'm not slamming Christianity. I'm not slamming Christian people. I'm just simply saying that that's where I began. And so I have to realize that baptism, I follow the train back and go, oh, look, you're not just going in the water. There's a spiritual exercise there. And so you have to realize, thank God that through Messiah, my eyes were open to the path of Torah. But in accepting the good, I also had to confront the bad and say, I have to deal with you, anti-Semitic spirit, so that I can move forward. Because as I've said, maybe I've said it before, maybe I haven't. In this class, I forget from week to week what all I've shared and what all I haven't. But the problem with Christianity is a lot of Christians want to go back to the book of Acts. The book of Acts is thoroughly Jewish congregation. All right? And they run into this frustration. They run into this wall. What's the wall? The wall is 325 AD. Because the church was started at 325 AD. It was started by Constantine at 325 AD. So everybody goes back to Rome. And they're frustrated because they can't get to the book of Acts. They're frustrated. Well, I don't know. Just because of God's providence, maybe because he wanted to do this today, so he used me to do it. I don't know. But I figured out that in order to go back, I've got to bust that wall down. I've got to destroy that wall and then go back. And when I went back, I said, this is the deal. The reason we can't get back to the book of Acts is because the book of Acts were Jews. They didn't know anything about all this other Christian stuff. And you have to shed that stuff. And listen, I mean, at first it was hard. This is kind of just random talk here. We're about to conclude, but it was hard at first. Look, when December rolls around, the whole world is a Xmas wonderland. It's hard at first. But I will tell you, probably because I was born in the winter, I chalk it up to that. I was born in the winter around Purim. Actually, I was born on the 4th of Adar. So right around Purim, I was born. My name is Mordecai, so Baruch Hashem. I love the winter festivals. I love all the festivals, but I have to say, if I'm honest with you, if I'm under a spotlight being interviewed, I have to say Hanukkah and Purim are my favorite. It's my favorite. And maybe it's because I just love the winter, and that's what it is. I got a new house, got a nice front lawn. I cannot wait to put up the Hanukkah bear in my front lawn. I can't wait. Right? And this year, it just happens to be the same time of year as that Xmas thing. I can't wait to put it. And we have this big menorah. I'm going to put up the big menorah, light it. It's going to be awesome. But, I guess what I'm trying to say is, once you embrace everything Hashem has for you, and you let go of what's not his, and you truly do that, all that soul attachment to all that stuff goes away. And you rejoice in the fact that I may be the only one on my block who's celebrating Hanukkah, but it's going to be such a good time. It's going to be such a blessing. And it's so much more meaningful. And that other stuff just becomes phony. and meaningless, especially when you realize that everything that in the Christian side of things that it's supposed to represent is all a lie anyway. It doesn't represent that at all. It's like cotton candy. It smells good. I mean, I love the smell of cotton candy. I never eat it. I just smell it because I realize once I take a bite, I'll be disappointed. There's nothing there, right? I hope that makes sense to you. I hope it helps you. Yes, Jennifer. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 So the thing was back when Christmas was originally its pagan, go by its pagan name, Saturnella or Sol Invictus Day, that Jews were actually required to go through the streets and do humiliating things. In some cases, they were required to stay indoors. They weren't allowed to come out at all. But you're right. It's very evil. And in fact, speaking of that holiday, I'm trying to think. I'll say the name of this demon. Forgive me for having to share it, but it's for educational sake. If you go online and Google Krampus. There was a movie that came out last year about this. Y'all know this already, so I'm not educating you. I didn't watch the movie, of course, but Krampus is the demonic antithesis to the Santa Claus, which the Santa Claus is actually a pagan deity. I won't say his name, but if you don't celebrate Christmas, then Krampus comes and basically like haunts you to a really, really bad way. But in Europe, they have these Krampus parades. And someone sent it to me and I watched like it and I was appalled. I'd never heard of this before. And I mean, you talk about, it looks like Halloween and Christmas. It's demonic to the max. Demonic to the max. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should just go and Google it. The thing about it is that, and I know I've talked about this before, but originally the elves of Santa, originally they were demons. And they went by names like Gambit and Mime and Mimic. And the whole point was they were about mischief, they were about confusion, they were about making fun of. And Santa Claus in England, when he was on his parade, he went through the parade drunk and disorderly, and it was just bad. There was debauchery and all kinds of stuff. In 1860s America, Christmas came to America. Then later, Coca-Cola got a hold of the Santa idea. And that's how we have the red Santa suit Santa now. This is why you have to understand the root of things, the root of it. The most important thing for the Jewish person, as I said this morning, if it's not in Torah, here's how you have to look at it when it comes to religious things. If it's not in Torah, it's pagan. That's just the bottom line. If it's not in Torah, it's pagan, no matter what it is. If it's any kind of religious festival whatsoever, if it's not in Torah, it's pagan, and we are forbidden from participating in it. That's just the bottom line. So when your relative, and I know it's hard because most people who come to Sar Shalom, it's not limited to Sar Shalom, but other Jewish communities as well. When you come to Sar Shalom and you're not from a Jewish background, you have family who are Christians, or like my family, they're kind of Christians, maybe. But they still celebrate Xmas. Now, they don't do this anymore because my family actually has been pretty good. And I guess maybe because they know I'm a rabbi, they just figure whatever, So they don't invite us anymore. But they would invite us to their Xmas party and we would have to respectfully decline. And it's a little awkward because we can invite them to our Hanukkah party. And sometimes we're like, we didn't come to my Christmas party. But it's different. It's totally different because my Hanukkah party is not pagan, but yours is. So you can come to mine, but I can't come to yours. I understand that's a difficult place to live. But when you understand the Torah prohibition about it, you just have to ask for Hashem through the merit of Yeshua to give you the grace to be able to say it as lovingly and as kindly as you can. And they still may be mad. And you have to just live with that you can't do that. Because it's a pagan festival. You say, well, no, it's about the birth of Yeshua. I'm sorry. It's not. It's just not. They may think it is, but that doesn't mean anything. You can't take a smoothie. You can't take the fat guy, the Asian fat guy. You can't take that idol, put it in your house and say, oh, look, it's Yosef. You can't do that. You can't do that. And these are never fun conversations to have. I mean, as a rabbi, people will come to me and say, well, my sister wants me to come to this or this or this, and I have to be the one to say, you really can't. My flesh wants me to say, oh, go ahead, because I just want to help. I want to be nice to people. But I know that I'm not doing them any favors. And in fact, I'm setting them up for significant failure by doing that. So, invite them to your holiday, which is a Torah holiday. And it's so much more fun anyway. So anyway, we'll conclude it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week will be week 7 and then week 8, and you get to graduate to be a Jew. It would be fantastic. Baruch Hashem.